Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 494 of the Constructive Criticism Podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, Mason Clark.
What up? I'm ready to game.
A man who is flapping his arms to Denver, Abe Stein.
Listen, flights are expensive, and sometimes you gotta just work it all out.
Do you guys know that I learned how the wing, like how airplanes fly, like this week?
Do you mean you understand the science of it, or you learned like how it works?
I didn't know that they pushed the air in different ways around the wing to give it lift. I actually had no idea that's how that worked.
Gotcha. Okay.
Always improving for me, but I did in fact learn that this week.
Flying's crazy. Physics don't like that.
I don't know. I always thought you just go fast enough and you get lift. No, that's not how it works at all. So, now we know.
Once upon a time, that was the sauce. That was the blade.
Yeah. The Wright brothers did it wrong, but they did do it.
You know who does it right is our people over at Patreon. If you want to support the show, one of the best ways to do that is support us directly over at patreon.com/ccmtg. And we have some new patrons to welcome this week, just like we do every week. We would like to welcome Nathan, AJ, Tim, and John, and Austin. Welcome to the fam. It was really cool this week to kind of see the total pop-off in the Discord of all these new people. People are already, getting in there talking about stuff. It's been really fun. Really quick, just want to mention what we're talking about this week. We are going to be doing our Pick 2 set review, which is something we straight up stole from Mason Clark on Even Odds Pod when he joined the show. So thank you, Mason, for giving us our amazing format in which we do our set reviews. I'd like you to talk about kind of what we're going to be doing today.
Yeah, so if you listen to other set reviews on shows, they're typically just like a top 8 or a top 10. And we're going to be doing kind of a similar idea, but with more context. So instead of having, like a number 7 card, we're trying to give you some caveat as to why it's good, but kind of better or whatever. We just have different categories that we're going to talk about each of the cards in. And at the start of every category, we're going to give you a little breakdown of sort of what that category means. That way you have an idea for why we're talking about that card. So, for example, Spencer's about to start us here with sleepers. And sleepers are sort of cards that we think are going to be playable, but aren't really getting their time in the sun, and people aren't really respecting them. That's the name Sleeper. And Spencer, take us off.
Well, we can't sleep on our sponsors before we move into the actual set review. I'd like to welcome our newest sponsor to the Constructor Criticism family, and that is Heavy Play. Heavy Play is making really, really good gear to be jamming within Magic, whether it be playmats, sleeves, deck boxes. They had a booth at Atlanta that people got to check out, and then we were lucky enough for them to offer us a sponsorship. And I got to say, Mason was like, wait till you see X or wait till you see Y when he was telling me about it. And the playmat, I unboxed it, and I probably texted Abe and Mason 20 times about this playmat unboxing experience that I had. Because it was the coolest playmat ever. I took it to my RCQ over at Kayfabe Cards, and when I opened it up and put it on the table, my opponent went, "Whoa, where'd you get that?" And I was like, that's a solid endorsement, if ever. The other cool thing is I'm a huge, the way that I shuffle, right, is from the bottom, that jam shuffle, and those curved sleeves were amazing. And I just want to say, ring endorsement from Quentin Pierce, who tried my other ones. I was trying to get, lend out some different stuff to people to get feedback before the sponsorship. Quinn took them to his next RCQ at Oasis Games also. The sleeves were the number one talk of both RCQs. People wanted to shuffle our decks. They wanted to check them out. And I can say, honestly, that both me and Quentin, they're my favorite sleeves I've ever used. So I've already been asked by multiple people where they can get some.
Yeah, so they're kind of, technically, I approached them, and then we had a conversation. They're like, we want to talk to you. And we wanted to make sure that we really tried this product before we actually talk about it on the show, because it is a thing where it's curved sleeves, how's that going to work? It's one of those things you do want to kind of get your hands on. It's not it's like when katanas first appeared, it's that's just the same thing, but kind of different. And that's what I really like about these sleeves, is that they didn't just rebrand the same kind of thing that people are already doing. They're trying to improve on the process. Same with the deck boxes, there's a lot of really great deck box products out there, but these actually use hardened plastic and are designed with slight magnets on the back to stick to the playmat, which you don't have to use them for, but you can. Then you just carry your playmat around, and they're very strong. I've tried really hard. If you shake really hard, they will fly. But like if you're just walking around like a normal person, they stick to it pretty well. Including like I've like purposely tried bumping into my own table, didn't fall off. But I played them for the SCGs. They were really good, and I like love the deck box, love the sleeves. It was great. And they even have inner sleeves to match their curved sleeves. So overall, it was a great product. And if you're interested in checking it out, you can go to their website and use code CCMTG to get 10% off all your orders.
Yeah, I'll just say this: the dice box sticking to the playmat, after you've opened that dice box and stick it to itself and put it on the playmat, that stuff's not going anywhere. And we all know the number of times that like somebody hits a dice box and like dice just literally go everywhere. Once again, that's CCMTG for 10% off. Don't forget our other sponsor, Untapped GT. We are an affiliate of them. They were really helpful for me when I was multitasking, playing Abe's mono red deck the last couple days. Really, it's a lot easier to play when you just know your percentages to draw everything, can just pull up your deck instantly. It is just like a really cool program. And if you're an arena gamer, you should definitely have an account, and use our affiliate link to sign up. All right. We didn't sleep on our sponsors, and we're not sleeping on these cards. First up, I have no doubt that you guys will like this one. All right, so Reasonable Doubt is an instant. It costs 1 blue for counter target spell unless its control plays 2. Suspect up to 1 target creature. Now, this set is actually giving us some other really powerful counter spells, and this is the first time that we have Suspect, so I'm going to read it for the listeners. A suspected creature has Menace and can't block. I really like this card in a multitude of ways for tempo decks. Whether it be the blue-black mid-range deck, whether it be if you're playing like a blue-red spells deck in standard potentially. The thing is that the Suspect works on both offense and defense, right? I can make it so that their creature can't block, but I can also give my creature Menace. So it kind of just sweet in that regard, and I think is a pretty reasonable upgrade to some of the other things that we have in these slots right now, even with even better ones coming that certain decks won't be able to play.
Yeah, I think finding the right deck that's going to want to play this effect, like it's going to have creatures on board and casting counter spells, is like not too hard right now in the format. We literally just talked about how blue-black is one of the best decks in the format before the set release, and especially in a deck with, just like Gix in it, or like flyers, being able to have like a Menace flyer, you're probably not blocking with it anyway, suddenly makes it so they can't just like trade off with their random tokens or their own flyers in combat, and that's just like really powerful. And as much as it doesn't have the like upside of make disappear, of like, oh well, I can make sure I counter the spell I need to counter, just there's a lot of stuff you can do with having Suspect, or a lot of value to be gained by using this to kind of use a counterspell to also manipulate combat on the following turn, and kind of like in a way your opponent might not be able to expect. So yeah, I can definitely see this card being something that has a role to play, and I think it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, like you're in a racing situation, your opponent casts like a creature or whatever, maybe they have like something that's back on defense, suddenly you counter their spell, make it so their shielder can't block or whatever, right? Like that is a big part of it too, assuming you can afford to get Menace down. I am curious, how does Suspect work with vehicles? I would imagine it loses the text as it becomes an artifact and goes back to being a vehicle. Oh, yeah. But that would be really good with Schooner, is the thing that jumped out to me.
Yeah, that is interesting. That could be pretty powerful. What else is Suspect? Let me pull it back up.
Yeah, because I was reading it, and I will say this, I know that in the game you actually put a counter. They have like little cutouts for suspected creatures. So I could see a thing where your thing actually stays suspected. That's like an interesting question to ask a judge about.
Yeah, if you, we could ask Garrison this question. Next up, I have Demand Answers. This card, I want to say that, like, while I understand that this might not be a sleep for some people, I still think people haven't caught on to like how much better this card is than some of its counterparts. And that is an instant for a red and 1. As an additional cost to the spell, sacrifice an artifact or discard a card, draw 2 cards. Why both? Why is this an either or, Abe? This seems
they got to keep up with Deadly Dispute.
I just don't understand.
Inflation, man, it's crazy.
This card. What's so funny is like the most of what I've seen this card talked about is actually in Pauper. Like, people are like, they're talking about this card a lot on Pauper, but there are so many artifacts lying around in games of Magic now that I would be shocked if this card just isn't usually draw 2 cards. And you know, it also can feed, you know, different types of strategies with that discard ability, things like that. I think this card's a total sleeper. I think that it is undervalued how much better this card is than its counterparts, and honestly, like how easy this will be to just be an instant speed draw 2 with like counter like tokens that you would have never used.
Yeah, I think something else about this card that I really appreciate is that like Oni Cult Anvil kind of is in the market for ways to get rid of excess artifacts or justify playing more artifacts and also find the right mix of things. Where Deadly Dispute was a card that was like really important to that deck because it could sacrifice like its random creatures or artifact creatures and get another artifact out of the deal. This plays a similar role while being just a little more castable and maybe even having reason to use the discard to draw. And so like the floor of Thrill of Possibility, which is fine, but the upside of, you know, enabling some of the more powerful cards in like a kind of untouched engine deck that's kind of not having the tools to shine right now, it just seems like it could easily have a home. And that's not even talking about like, you know, even just in like Pioneer, there's a lot of ways that this could be used just for the ability to like sacrifice an artifact and cash in on that for the cards in the right shell. And so, you know, it's just, anytime you're seeing a card that's already on the fringe of playability get an upgrade of just here now it's just better. That's a card that obviously is going to have applications.
Yeah, I think it's really big to remember too, because you might be at home thinking like, well, I already have Deadly Dispute, but Deadly Dispute locks you into black, and in formats like Modern and those kind of things, that's less of a problem to be like locked into one color. But for formats like Standard and Pioneer and Pauper to some extent, like the fact that you can now be a red something deck with a card like this really does actually change up a lot of like what your deck can be. Because maybe before you needed to be, let's say, a Grixis deck to make it work to have Deadly Dispute. Well, now you know you have Experimental Synthesize, you have this card, you got something going, and you can pair that with just blue or just green, and suddenly your mana is a lot better. And that's something that's very important actually, is having functional mana. So I think this card is really cool and actually opens up the potential for whole new decks in the way that maybe Deadly Dispute seems like it would, but maybe doesn't in practice.
I just want to say, kind of before we move on, that this section, like this is one of the reasons I love the Pick 2 set review so much. Like, neither of my cards would have made a top 10 list, like in any world. But we got to talk about these cards, and I'm reasonably excited for them. Mason, I'm also reasonably excited for some of your cards. Why don't you go next?
Yeah, so first up is Case of the Uneaten Beast, and somehow I get caught having to explain a weird mechanic again in a set review, but such is life. So cases are enchantments, and they do the first thing on the top box. And when you look at it in case, there's going to be a top box, the middle box, and a bottom box, kind of like a saga. So this one says on its top box, which it just has as long as it's on the battlefield, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, gain a life. So it has a Johnny's presence, as long as it's your creature. Then to solve the case, you gain 5 or more life this turn. So that doesn't have to be from this. You could play, you know, Revitalize or whatever, or some gain 5 life card. And then solving the case, sacrifice this. Creatures, cards in your graveyard gain. You may cast this card from your graveyard until end of turn. So what I like about this card is Ajani's Welcome and these kind of like gainy life cards have always been like fringe playable and very popular. So a subset of players, and this is like the strongest version of that we've ever seen, which is cool. But also it has you looking at the like, hey, gaining life synergies could be really powerful. What can you do as the payoff with this? And I think for something like Martyr and Modern, or like anything in that kind of ballpark where gaining life is a big part of it, and you have a lot of cheap creatures that you could replay, if you are considering playing the Ajani card, you could play this card instead. And you just would, because it's just better most of the time.
No, it's actually better all the time. Johnny's Welcome actually is only your creatures anyway, so it's just a strict upgrade.
True. Yeah, I think you have to solve this.
Oh, I see. You don't get to...
You don't get the choice to do it, is my understanding. Which I think for the most part is an upside, but it is like legally there's a downside and I must disclose it to you.
Okay.
So
I don't know if that's actually true, because...
Is that not true?
it enters the solved, because it's a card that moves through like states, right? Once it gets
Yeah.
solved, you put like a solved status on it, but the solving happens at the
Oh.
end step. So then it just has the text: sacrifice this case, creature cards in your graveyard gain, you may cast this card from your graveyard until turn. I think it's on your
Does it keep
on
the
demand
first
for you.
ability?
It does. It always has the whenever a
Oh,
creature is
then yeah,
that part of it.
this is just a strict upgrade to a Johnny's Welcome.
Perfect. Well, yeah, and you know, Johnny's Welcome, not a card that has like one approach or anything. I've got high mythic before that card in historic.
I
That was a
also I
different
was going to mention that deck.
yeah, but like this card is just strong, and like if you have, they're like, and they always do this. They print some strong a Johnny Pride Meat variant, a creature that grows off life gain, and in a format like maybe modern, like I mentioned with modern cards, or maybe Pioneer with a life focused deck. I don't think this is very good in Amalia, but like in a deck that was focused around those things in Heliod, this card could be very very strong and a way to battle through your opponent having a bunch of kill spells, which is typically the problem for these decks. So that's why I like this card.
Oh, it's interesting to me you don't think it's good in Amalia. Like, I wouldn't play several copies of this card, but I think the first copy as like a fifth like Lunarch veteran spot
Mm-hmm.
does have a lot of merit, just because it gives you a way to like if you come close coming, or like if you just explore once or whatever, especially on the deck's playing Sentinel, the 3/4 that makes a map when it comes to player attacks,
Mhm.
like that plus Wildgrowth Walker plus this is like very close to 5 already. If you just like get one trigger off the Wildgrowth Walker, and then you have like a rally kind of just sitting in play, in addition to being
Mhm.
your okay, I'm going to play the cards from hand in combo,
Mhm.
like potential. So it's not a card I would say like playing 4 of, because the
Sure.
deck has so many reasons to want to play so many creatures. But I do think the ability is like pretty sweet and has enough overlap to be worth like considering in the right spots.
Yeah, I could definitely see like one. I wouldn't want to play like a ton of these, so I totally respect and understand having one. I think it is just hard. Like the space is so tight, and I'm already like wanting to move off Coco in the deck because like you have so many things that make it bad, and you're a bad Coco deck that like adding this kind of hurts. But if you're like using those kind of slots for cards like this in small numbers, and I could totally see that. So
I just want to mention, like, I think we've mentioned this on set reviews before, but when I see a rare symbol on a card like this, it makes me think that the card might be pretty tuned. Like that it was worked on pretty heavily at WotC, or they have a reason to believe that it should be rare outside of just like it does a unique thing. But I don't know. I personally have played a Johnny's Welcome, like Mason, early historic days. Getting those Pride Mates up, and it was actually quite a good deck for a little while. For a hot minute there, easily could get anybody who wanted it mythic, and that was a powerful format. It's kind of similar to what our standard format looks like right now in size. I think, if I'm not mistaken, about kind of the size that historic was to start off. It was very close to what standard will look like when this card comes in. So I wouldn't count it out.
yep, and I think in modern, the modern park stuff is just pretty reasonable. You just want to play these kind of cards. So there you go. Martyr Park Truthers, drink the Kool Aid. But for everyone else, let's move on to Breakout, which is a sorcery for red and a green. It says, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them. If that creature has mana value 2 or less, you may put it onto the battlefield, and it gains haste until end of turn. If you didn't put that revealed card into the battlefield, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your deck in a random order. So 2 mana for look at the top 6 to put any creature into your hand. I probably wouldn't play in a lot of formats. I would play in some decks. But when you add the put the thing into play clause and give it haste, I think this card opens up a ton of possibilities in a ton of different decks. I think obviously people jump to combo applications like Devoted Druid, like we got another card, the time is now, but like that is a strong gain for the deck. There's like just aggressive decks, like maybe you have like an A plus B combo and you also like are beating down, then like this could be good. So it's a card that looks kind of weird and looks like I would argue typically a card I might poo poo, but the giving haste and putting the thing immediately on the battlefield, I think is going underappreciated right now. I haven't seen much talk about it, and this card's just pretty good. And if he does hit a bigger mana value card in your deck, you're still not whipping, so your fail rate is often draw a card.
If this card had been in standard for green red devotion, it would have played this card with Burning Tree Emissary. I have actually zero doubt that you would have given basically anything to be playing this many Burning Tree Emissaries. And, with Karn gone, I don't know, maybe we go back to like a Burning Tree hyper aggressive build of the deck that plays like Dragonlord Atarka or something.
Hold up, I'm looking at Bard class Abe.
I was actually just about to say Bard class.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, did I
And that was
Bard
the whole
class?
statement.
Did
Just
I
you
Bard
can pay
class
red
this?
green and find the right legend.
Oh, that's hot.
If they enter the battlefield, it's not when they're cast. We got the Bard class card.
It's another Bard class card. Jokes. Well, we can go into Bard class, but I actually do think that if you are in the market for a Burning Tree Emissary Devotion style deck, that this is the home freaking run. Like unbelievable the pips that it will get you.
Yeah, I think if you just play Burning Tree now that you mention it, and you have some extra slots where you have some strong A plus B combo. I mean, Burning Tree into this is just probably two things, right? It's a pretty good fail case for your Burning Tree.
Yeah, my thought for this card immediately was more of the combo applications. You can play it in Jeskai Ascendancy, which already has the free splash if Green's already playing it. But Ascendancy, being able to get your Caryatid on board, or the Loam Speaker on board in Pioneer, is just another way to make that deck more consistent. And also, specifically getting it in play with haste on the same turn means that from any spot where you have a resolved Ascendancy, you're just that much more potent and also that much more consistent when there's so many just other things this card can do, while also just being, and it triggers your Ascendancy. It does it all kind of, and sets you up really well to find your code condition. And also, kind of like you said, Spencer, in the context of this red-green deck, would be if you have top-end creatures that you're willing to pay 2 mana to find because they're that impactful, and also the fail rate of, well, I'll just get my 2-drop and it has haste, and that's pretty good, to get something on board. That's still just a really strong card. Looking at 6 cards to find something is a lot. Impulse finds anything at 4 cards, and that card's the best card selection you can get at 2 mana. And this is a red-green sorcery that sees 1.5 times as many cards as that. So any amount of creature-based combo. Well, also, I mean, they just banned Fury, but being a red-green card that finds you other things, this is a great card with Omnath. Probably a great player in Pioneer. I could see a world where the Niv Mizzet decks play this if there was a reason, or Omnath decks play this if there was a reason to not play Bring the Lights and stuff.
All right, Abe, you are up next. Why don't you shoot us with your first one?
Yeah, so my first sleeper is Proft's Eidetic Memory, which is a 1 in a blue legendary enchantment that when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. You have no maximum hand size. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've drawn more than 1 card this turn, you put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the number of cards you've drawn this turn, -1. I don't think I've seen anyone really talk about trying to do anything with this card, but I think that in general, cards that allow you to continue to pile stats on the board while spending your mana to draw cards are just fundamentally dangerous, right? Part of the reward of drawing cards is that, in the future I'll get the payoff of getting to do something to the game. And I'll have more resources that I'll have access to. But it's at the cost of spending my mana on doing that rather than impacting the board right now. Whenever you're able to impact the board right now while also generating resources for the future, especially at a low cost like this, at its floor, this card is, okay, 2 mana, I have no maximum hand size, draw a card, put a +1 counter on my creature when I move to combat. That's already just a powerful, not super powerful, but it's still a good effect. And the fact you get to repeat that every turn with any future amount of card draw you have, and especially right now with Flow of Knowledge in Standard, there's just a real potential to, especially playing the Mono Blue deck, jockey for a position where your opponent, you just have a flying creature around, you get them to tap out for their thing, maybe you have the counterspell, maybe you don't. But if you have this card in play, or it's late in the game and you have 7 mana, you can just cast this card, cast Flow, and they're getting 8 counters on something, and that is a lot. There's ways to draw a lot of cards in number, in blue already, and so I think this card has potential to like do much more than nothing in that. And I think also like between that and like the Ozolith in green, like there could be a blue green kind of clues and beatdown stuff, or like cantrip creature stuff. There's a lot this card can do, and I just think that the foundational principles of what the card allows you to do and how it rewards you for drawing cards in a way that impacts the board is really strong, and I'm not sure people have really identified that.
I love that. I will say that I think it has some nombos with the mono blue stuff because it really cares about your stuff being instant and sorcery is. However, it does have a pretty strong friend in standard and ledger shredder that also wants to be doing these things, which is pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, I Legend Shredder was a card that jumped out to me when you're talking about this. Like, oh, two spells. I always get a counter now, right? Including my connive. But I think another thing that jumps out to me is like prowess decks often have to play a bunch of burn spells, but they want to have some sort of like card selection as well, or a way to like move through the deck and keep chaining. And this lets you do things, ironically not with sleight of hand very well, but with other ones like Consider, where you can like kind of chain for a little bit. Your Swiss Spear grows some from the prowess for this turn, and this helps it grow long term. That I think is pretty appealing and maybe opens up like a blue red prowess E type deck that plays a little differently, because now like your cantrips are actually something where your way to draw cards really matter. And there's also maybe a world where like we see a new type of blue deck pop up, like a blue X deck, kind of like Abe mentioned with blue green. But I could definitely see this card seeing a lot of play and being really strong.
Spencer, is this the home for your otter?
Dude, maybe. I mean, you got that and Ledger Shredder together. That's you're cooking with something. That's interesting. And it's blue green.
Yeah. Something to think about. The next sleeper I have is Analyze the Pollen. And this is a real Mason Clark card, because this is where we get to talk about how playing more cards that are like lands in your deck are good. But talk about the card first. It's a single green sorcery. It has, as an additional cost to cast the spell, you may collect evidence 8. Now, collect evidence is where you can exile cards with a total mana value of the number it asks of you or greater from your graveyard as an additional cost to do something, or to cast a spell or use an ability. And the card says, search the library for a basic land card. If evidence was collected, instead, search the library for a creature or land card, reveal that card, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. At first, I was like not very interested in this card. It seemed like it was going to be really, really difficult to actually collect the evidence unless you were some sort of trade off every card mid-range deck. And those decks haven't really had the time in a while to play a Lay of the Land. But then it dawned on me that this card is actually so close to being enabled by using a single herd migration to go find a land out of the domain deck, that this could like enable a world where domain is able to play like one fewer Atraxa, have one more way to find the right land type it needs, or find the right, like find its second white source or whatever. Maybe if the deck needs like starts ramping a bit less because it's a little susceptible to that, this still allows you to have a high virtual land count, or find that Archangel of Wrath you need, or find that Cavern of Souls you need to fight through the counter magic, simply by using your setup spells effectively. And I feel like it's like the number 8 is a pretty high number, but when you're building with it in mind, there's a lot of things this can do, and like just having your one Atraxa, or even like in Pioneer, just having like, Emrakul is like kind of a bad example because that's the one meant to pair with Traverse. But having whatever your Haymaker is be something that doesn't have to rely on you having Delirium in order to tutor it up consistently like you do with the next best in class in Traverse Juvenwald, like that is a very, very real upside. And I think there's like real potential for this card to make that impact, especially when it's surrounded by the tools to do it.
Yeah, I think like picking up in Pioneer, like if you look at the Soul Player decks, they often have too many creatures in the graveyard, and they need some way to like make land drops and find Soul Player in friend, like Yawgmoth Scavenger, I believe it's its name, or Urborg Scavenger, excuse me, which is like the mini Soul Player. So this card works really well with that as well. So like make your early land drops and then get rid of an excess thing, and then find your Soul Flare. But I will also say that there's a weird thing with this card that I haven't seen many people really talk about. I don't know exactly how to use, but I think it's worth mentioning. You can exile most of your graveyard to this card because you can over evidence. And I don't know why I want to over evidence yet, but I think it's important to talk about that you could get rid of like basically your entire graveyard minus a singular card if you wanted to some reason like stack the odds on a card that's like target a random card in your graveyard, which like they do things like that on occasion. So just a weird thing to keep in mind, but I like this card. It's cool.
Could make a gigantic Murktide region.
Unironically, you would grow your like you could get rid of all the lands in your yard too. I don't know why you would, but you could. Like that's just something to mention.
All right, Mason Clark. The number of times where I have just put dig up, I was like, maybe this deck just wants a dig up. They could just like change things because this deck wants a dig up because of how hard you sold me on dig up during our pick 2 set review is too darn many, and so somebody's gonna need to prove this to me.
Dig up was an ape card.
Oh, anyway, I've seen a lot of Lay of the Lands. You got to convince me on every Lay of the Land. I'm not convinced that any Lay of the Land has ever really been that good. So
it wasn't until the herd migration thing that I was like, this is Lay of the Land and maybe your third Attraction.
I do think the herd migration thing is real. Like Striped Riverwinder type cards are real. We have some new land cyclers.
I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying prove it to me. Like I just like this is one of those prove it to me.
Yeah. Peek behind the curtains, you said the land cyclers. The way that I got to this card was that I started by being like, oh wow, there's a 6 mana, like 2 mana basic land cycler. That's probably like playable in something. And then I was like, there's a 7 mana land cycler that gains you life and is also a 4 of or 3 of in the best deck in standard by many accounts.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably a better card.
Those are awesome, Abe. Let's move on to favorites. So favorites are just, for whatever reason, we wanted to talk about this card. It's our favorite in the set. It could be our favorite for many reasons. It could be because you think the basic land art is sweet. It could be, Abe, I love it. It could be because you just, it spoke to you in some way. Kind of like both of mine did for me. We're going to go first with Axebane Ferox is my first favorite. It is 2 green for a beast, death touch haste, and has ward collect evidence 4. So first of all, death touch haste on a 4/4 for 4, that's already a banger. But I actually when I sent this card to my friend Matt, and I was like, collect evidence 4 is like kind of a lot to just like have against an aggressive deck to start out, right? Like it's possible that like that you curve out and it's pretty easy for you. But it seems like it could be kind of difficult to really get this thing off the board right when you want to get it off the board.
Yeah, I think that's true, and also you can just set up situations where they can never collect evidence for. Like if you just have a Rest in Peace in play, or like you Leyline of the Void them, good luck. It's gonna get countered. Whatever you're casting targeted is countered. You can't pay ward. That's like a pretty easy situation to set up if you want to, and it forces your opponent to have like a very specific set of answers to this creature.
Yeah, and it's like you're gonna want to play Rest in Peace at some point, or some card like that. Like it's just gonna happen.
Yeah, I think that it has a lot of competitions in older formats. Right now, its only competition in Standard is like Uvenwald Oddity, but honestly, like Uvenwald Oddity's problem right now in Standard, I guess you could also say Thundering Raiju is some competition for this card too. But like the hasty 4-drop big stuff slot is it's actually kind of smaller than it used to be in Standard. So I could totally see this like either in a Gruul deck, or maybe you're like an aggressively slanted black-green deck, or even green-white deck. Like I think that there's many decks that would want this card in Standard, and it is big boy. And I also really like that it attacks into Sheoldred profitably, which is kind of hard for some of these creatures to do, because I think that you would happily trade this for a Sheoldred in a lot of cases if you're playing that style of deck. So that's kind of something. I also think the art is hot. Come on. Look at that good boy.
It's also a proper beast. Beasts are often underrepresented these days. Dinosaurs and whatever the monster of the week is. Good old fashioned beast. How could you hate that?
You can't, and I don't. I'm gonna get this name wrong, and this is me really trying. Kylox's Volt Strider is next. This is my next favorite. This is a blue, and a red for an artifact vehicle. You can collect evidence 6, and then it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. Whenever Kylox Volt Strider attacks, you may cast an instant sorcery spell from among cards exiled with it. If that spell will be put into a graveyard, put it on the bottom of its owner's library instead. And it has Crew 2. First of all, I'm not convinced that this card isn't good, but also, I just really like the design of this card, which is why it hit my favorites. Where you get to, like, you can always, like, collect evidence once you get a 6 to give it more fuel for the fire. And then, like, Crew 2 cost is actually really small for a 4/4, like, historically. I think that it's, like, aggressively costed, does a cool thing, and even if it never sees play because there's never, like, the right support for it, this is, like, just a sweet Magic card that I'm sure people will get enjoyment out of at their kitchen table, and that I will personally try to play with a bunch in Standard.
Yeah, I gotta say, first of all, I think you did pronounce it correctly, which is, like, hats off to you. But B, that it is a card that does something so unique and cool on its own, and also is just functional outside of that. Like, you only have to collect evidence with it, like, one time for it to really start being a card advantage engine, because once you have that, like, let's say you get, like, Lightning Strike and an Opt under there, or a Consider, and, like, or maybe just exile a Treasure Cruise to it, right? In Pioneer or something. You exile a Treasure Cruise to it, you attack for 4. You don't cast that turn. Next turn, you crew it with something. You're attacking, you can cast something else out of there. So it's not like you just have access to cards you exiled that turn with it. You, like, by getting one activation, now have it fed for several attacks. And that just makes it a really, really cool, like, value engine creature, while also being, like, a really, like, solid, like you said, like, aggressively, like, slanted body on its own before you even get to that. So it is just a really, really sweet card. And I also just like the bubbles all over the art. I don't know. Is it bubbles is pretty cool? Just me?
No, it's cool. The
I don't know
card's
about
really
you,
cool.
Mason.
The card opens up a lot of things, and it weirdly leans into. And I didn't even think about this when I was saying it earlier, but like the overpaying. Like your opponent might have a card like Unlicensed Hearse in play, and you dump a bunch of things, and you're just like collect evidence 15, and now they're all in there. And whenever it attacks, like that also counts when you normally crew it as well, because you're not locked into crewing it via the collect evidence way. So I think this card's probably actually pretty strong in the right spots and very cool. And I'm excited to see what people do with it.
All right, Mason, you're up next. What is your first favorite?
My first is Ill-Timed Explosion. This is a sorcery. Draw 2 cards. Then you may discard 2 cards. When you do, Ill-Timed Explosion deals X damage to each creature. X is the highest mana value among cards discarded this way. Just kind of a cool, like, is it Wrath effect? Like, draw some cards, clean the board up a little bit. Might set up your creativity, might set up your, reenact the crime. Admittedly, that's a lot of mana, but, like, this kind of card is pretty cool, and I like it. And there's a lot of weird reanimator-ish things you can do in Standard right now, and this card lets you open up, like, a whole new version of that. So that's why it's my favorite.
I really love when I read this card the first time. I was like a big fan. I thought to myself, this is like a very Spencer card. It reminds me of dude, I had such a what was the name of the, like, instant 3 blue red?
Hypothesical.
Yeah, I was such a hypothesical guy. I, like, tried that in so many decks. Just reminds me of that. I'm a fan.
Yeah, I think this is also just probably one of the strongest cards in the set. Like, in addition to being really sweet as just 4-mana draw 2 that has the upside of card selection and Wrath of God. Like, it does not take a lot for this card to clean up most problems in Standard. Even like some dead soft counter magic, or like the wrong piece of interaction, or like a threat you don't need. Like, any 4-drop, and another copy of this is 4-mana, deal 4 to the board, draw 2, discard 2. Discarding like a Make Spear you can't cast probably cleans up a lot of like the token stuff going on in like decks like Soldiers or just a lot of the small ball stuff. And in your best case, like you're saying, Mason, like Cruelty of Gix is a card that is pretty good. There are already decks that are built around playing like Breach the Multiverse, which is a strong 7-drop. You could play a deck that is Grixis and plays those really strong black cards or enables those really strong black cards pretty easily with low mana requirements, and this card would be the full package in not only giving you access to the resources to use those cards at face, but also to set you up to like, get to a board state where you're going to be able to use that effectively, even with just something like Carnosaur, right? Like that alone is just a really, really potent card at all stages, and this is a great card to hit off of Carnosaur because you can just sweep lower things than it too. So I think this card has a ton of potential and application in Standard, and maybe even beyond that. Like I could maybe see a world where this is a card that's in the sideboard of Arclight Phoenix in Pioneer, just as like maybe I've historically had trouble with the mono white matchup because I have so many things to answer all the time, and it's hard for me to like really clear the board with the sweepers I have access to. But here's one where I am able to like draw to discard an Arclight Phoenix and something else, or like a Treasure Cruise that is going to be too much, and now I'm answering everything, Adelines or otherwise. And I just think that's like a really, really cool and strong effect, and it's it might be. It was like going to be a card I was going to put as a hit, if not for just how many strong.
My other card is Deadly Cover Up. This is 3 black for a sorcery. As additional cost to cast this spell, you may collect Evidence 6. Important to note, it's a may collect. Destroy all creatures. If evidence was collected, exile a card from your opponent's graveyard, then search its owner's library, hand, and graveyard for any number of cards with the same name and exile them. That player shuffles, then draws cards for each card exiled this way from their hand. 2 big things to note about this card. One is that it is any card from the graveyard. So when I cast the Wrath effect, I can like hit your Treasure Cruise or whatever, right? Like maybe I just cast this because I just need to. So it counts as like a bad surgical extraction, as like a really bad fail case, but a fail case nonetheless. And 2, because it's a may on the collect evidence, you can still just play this as like your bad 5-mana Wrath that you might play in a standard deck. So I think this card is very cool. It is a brand new. We've seen this with the End and not Theros, Eldraine recently. So there's weirdly just like a lot of black kill and then exile everything from your deck. I know that like these effects have always been overrated, but there's something to me thinking about like, what if I played a black mid-range deck in Standard where like my Wrath and my kill spell, which is sometimes hyper efficient if I'm losing, just also got rid of all the other threats. Like it might not be that bad, but it's so against conventional wisdom because normally you have to spend a card to get this effect. But now we're getting a lot of cards with that effect stapled on as upside. So I would like Deadly Cover Up. I'm curious what y'all think. And the art's insane as well. Could be on here just for that.
You want to strip mine somebody in cube with this card so bad because they can take basic lands.
Yep.
This was the joke in my chat about this card was finally a card that makes strip mine playable, which I thought was really funny. But outside of that, I do actually think that just the ability to wrath the board for 5 mana, something we've already been paying for recently. I think that this card can easily find a situation where it's collected Evidence 6, and actually, if we're being honest, it could be better in the Domain Mirror. If we think about like the way the domain decks are constructed right now, we've already seen people starting to do things like bring in the adventure card,
Virtue of Persistence,
right? As like one of its removal spells. So like we've already started to lean more towards our black mana. I think this card could totally end up seeing standard play in just that deck.
Yeah, I mean, I think this card has applications too as being like a role player on both ends. Like this is kind of like a slaughter game style effect you can play in your deck that's otherwise interacting. Like if you're like a Black X mid-range deck that has like discard spells or like a blue-white control deck with some counter magic, playing in something where they have either a really, really limited number of kill conditions or like only certain really good interaction, you don't have to get something that dies from the sweeper itself, so it doesn't just get creatures. Like it gets even basic lands, but you can even just get like their best draw spell or their best threat or their combo piece, and at the cost of like collecting evidence 6, if you're doing things to kind of trade resources up until that point, which in a lot of the spots where that effect is really good and is so good that you want to enable it, you likely can, and are looking to in the games where this is going to be good enough on turn 5. Like that's good, and the like destroy all creatures at 5 mana being the floor of the card is honestly not all that bad, right? So yeah, I think it's a pretty sweet one.
Awesome. Hey, I really like your deduction there. Would you like to move on to your first favorite?
Yeah, so my first favorite is Deduce. Hence Spencer's nice little pun there. But Deduce is a very simple card. It's 1 in a blue, instant, draw a card, investigate. I have played a lot of Think Twice in my day. I'm actually a big Think Twice truther because I think that it's really cool to have a card that just says do nothing, but if you find a time to do nothing again, you get rewarded. Kind of like bails you out for being a deck that does nothing. But this is just like, it's not necessarily a strict upgrade because there are applications of maybe your opponent makes you discard cards, you discard Think Twice, and then you're able to flash back. But in terms of just if you're using it as I want to draw 2 cards, it is 1 mana cheaper than that, and it has the additional benefit of being like draw a card, create an artifact, which with inaudible creativity or you know, just a lot of those effects. There's a lot of ways to use a game object that are, and especially artifacts that like 2 mana without spending a card create an artifact. Let alone the fact that it's an artifact that draws you a card itself too. So it's like also just this Think Twice. Is definitely a really strong card at instant speed for a lot of these decks that are kind of looking to play combo control games of I'll leave up my interaction, but also I need to be setting up, and then they can kind of get punished by maybe leaving up interaction when they should have set up, or vice versa. This lets them do both, and also in those games where you're playing control deck and trying to control the game, this gives you just another card and another way to pull ahead of your opponent in the raw resources. So I think this card not only has some potential to be like some grease in the wheels, but it's also just one that's a personal favorite of mine. I also think that blue-white control in Pioneer has a chance to maybe get a little bit more permissive in the way it's built and play a little bit more counter magic and stuff. The more it gets cards like this that make it so that more turns of the game, especially in the early game, it's not getting super punished for leaving open all of its mana. Like the 4 mana breakpoint in that deck is so important because of the Wandering Emperor and Memory Deluge that it's like, okay, I can either be getting more cards to get into the next stage of the game, or I can be interacting with the board depending on what my opponent makes me do. This is another card that allows those double threat situations of, okay, I'll counter your spell, but maybe you like forced me to, right, you didn't play your thing into my counter spell, so now the mana I left up to do something I didn't get to do anything with. Now I have a card that helps me hit my land drops and use my mana when I'm at that stage, while also leaving up to counter all of your spells. And that can be really, really impactful in how those games develop. And I think is a card that a deck like Blue Control Pioneer could easily play a copy or 2 of quite happily, if not more.
Yeah, I think this card, follows rectangle theory pretty well to the point where it could just be a better Think Twice in a lot of situations. I don't know how far past Think Twice we've moved as like, Magic gamers, as far as like the way that what you're rewarded for in Magic. But it's cheaper than Think Twice. It just it doesn't have, I can't forbidden alchemy into it like the hotness that we could in Standard. But I think that the upside of having something laying on the battlefield is a good enough improvement. So
Yeah, I think Twice is its floor, not its ceiling, right? Like, it is better to be like, oh, the worst case scenario with this card is it's a Think Twice, and more often enables my weird artifact synergy / payoff thing. I think this plus creativity just makes a lot of sense. So it's a cool card. I really like it.
Yeah, my other favorite from the set is Outrageous Robbery, which is black X instant says target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library face down. You may look at and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. If you cast a spell this way, you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast it. I just love playing my opponent's cards. This is like a card I can't wait to draft in like Arena Cube or just any cube. Like there's not much more fun than playing with the cards that your opponent has in them. I love Siphon Insight for the same reason. And so this is just a big dose of that. I think it's really awesome.
Isn't there a Khans of Tarkir card that is the exact same for one more mana in Sultai colors?
It's a little bit different. There's a Villainous Wealth, which I also thought of as the parallel because it's another set with a bunch of face down creatures. But Villainous Wealth, it's kind of like a Genesis wave off their deck. You like pay the 3 and X, and then you like exile the X cards.
Do you manifest all of them?
No, you can play all of them with mana value X or less.
Oh, okay.
So it's like if you do it for 5, you look at the top 5, and you can cast anything that costs 5 or less. But that's when you just get to draw the cards, and then you have to play them out slowly as opposed to casting them immediately. But it's an instant as opposed to a sorcery, and it's one color, which is pretty sweet.
I can see why it's your favorite. It's a sweet card. Next up, we have Hopefuls. These are cards that we hope would see play for one reason or another. Maybe it's because we think that we'd like the decks that they would fit into. Maybe it's because we think they could improve the format in some way. Things like that. I'll go first again. My first one is Frantic Scapegoat. This card is 1 red for a creature goat. It has haste. When it enters the battlefield, suspected. So it means it enters suspected. It can't attack or block. Whenever 1 or more creatures enter the battlefield under your turn, if Frantic Scapegoat is suspected, you may suspect 1 other creature. If you do, it is no longer suspected. So we've entered like an interesting place in like standard Magic where it feels hard to find like the perfect red 1-drop these days. Like we're playing Phoenix Chicks. Some people don't really like Swiftspear in the way that for the spells that they've given us, stuff like that. And I really like that this one can give something else menace. If that's how I choose to use it later, I think that it will often get in a couple of attacks and be a thing lying around to get excess damage later on in the game, things like that. I think this card is what I would call just good enough, and I kind of hope it's just good enough. I've had red 1-drops on our lists before. I think I had the 2/2 haste one, went back to your hand in Neon Dynasty, but I think this one could make it, and I'm hopeful because I really don't like playing Phoenix Chick, guys. Like I feel dirty every time I do it. So
yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that there's there's room for improvement in the standard red 1-drop spot right now, and I think that Frantic Scapegoat being 1/1 haste menace can't block on its own is already like in the same realm as Phoenix Chick of 1/1 flying can't block as far as like 1-drop evasive. But this having the upside of passing along like menace to the next thing seems really, really powerful, especially with just thinking of all the good 3-drops in like standard red right now. Like, okay, my Godric can't block. It wasn't blocking anyway. This is a card meant for attacking. Now it has menace, and if I'm triggering it, it's going to have flying as well. So I have a flying menace 4/4 with fire breathing on the turns where I trigger it. That can't block. Same with like Squee, some of the smaller things. One of the biggest challenges I have with red, and especially against the mid-range decks right now, is that they're so good at putting just like bigger bodies on the ground, especially high numbers of toughness on the ground to attack past, and a lot of the creatures on the low end don't really do a good job of that, which is why Phoenix Chick is a card that's been like having rising stock. This card solves so much of that by just being a nuisance on its own and then making something else a nuisance. And I'm really excited to play with it. I think this is this was near a hit for me just for the way the standard is right now.
Yeah, I think like enter the battlefield, this creature has menace, and then make one of your other creatures have menace, or their creature can't block. Is pretty good for a 1/1, and it's definitely the best one of these we've talked about. Like We talked about Gold Hound from Capenna. We talked about the Ronin. Like, this is one that doesn't, like, its only downside is it can't block. Like, it is a 1/1 with menace.
Was Goldhound mine too?
Yeah, it was yours too.
Wow.
We talked about how it would bridge and it beat down.
I'm such a sucker for these wonderful creatures.
Yeah, you're a mark, dude.
We've all got a type.
Yeah.
That's so funny. I just want to be clear. You can't put it on their thing, right? Like, you can't suspect.
No,
you have to suspect.
No, it's whenever it enters under your control. You can suspect one of the other creatures that entered the battlefield.
Yeah, you can't suspect their thing.
Whenever one or more other creatures enter the battlefield under your control, if frantic scapegoat is suspected, you may suspect one of the other creatures. If you,
one of the other creatures that enter.
Yeah,
I understand.
It'd be
I understand.
So
I
sick if it worked the other way. That would be.
Yeah, my bad. I thought it was like if you trigger this, you can suspect anything. That's my bad.
Yeah, no,
you can, however, throw this goat under a bus if you've passed along the suspect.
Yeah.
Like this thing, once it's no longer a good attacker, is just
once it's
ready.
No longer a suspect of the crime it didn't commit, you can then let
it's
it
just
be
carrying the torch for some real criminal.
It is. Yeah, that's some flavor right there. A real scapegoat.
Yeah.
My next one is Krengo's Buzz Crusher. This is an artifact creature, Insectopter. It's Flample. That's flying and trample. It's the best of all mechanics. When Krengo's Buzz Crusher enters the battlefield, for each player, destroy up to one non-basic land that player controls. For each land destroyed this way, its controller may search its library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tab, and then shuffle. So I did include this this is a hopeful, because it does in fact kill Lotus. It kills, which I think matters a lot for the blue-white versus Gruul matchup in Pioneer, to the point where I would consider main decking this card for that reason alone. I think that matchup's really rough, and because they're, I legitimately would just try to really put some Parmesan in there and choose them out. I think that it's one that I'm definitely going to try out as a 4-drop. And I could see it seeing sideboard play in other formats too. We've seen cards in similar space, and definitely good enough to see standard play. Just a 4/4 flyer for 4 that can mess up your opponent's. Like, these Esper mana bases are crazy, and this blocks really well in matchups like that. So
yeah, I think this is like Obsidian Charmaw ported to formats that aren't modern, and I think that's a pretty promising card. Just at the face of, this is a card you can put in your sideboard to solve a problem that is very real in the format, specifically Lotus Field. I think that was the big talk of this card, is it's worded so strangely where it doesn't target the land that gets destroyed just to solve that problem. But having more ways to interact with problematic lands like that and Ghost Quarter the Unghost Quarterable is good, and also just a 4-mana flying trampling creature that could disrupt your opponent in other ways, punish them for having a really basic mana base. There's already decks in Pioneer that use Cleansing Wildfire to kind of ramp, that maybe could use this on both sides of okay, well, I can use my Cleansing Wildfires to ramp me, but if your mana base is really greedy, now between having Buzz Crushers, which I can play on turn 3 after using the Wildfire my own thing, I can go after your mana base a bit, access copies.
That works on both too, because it does say destroy. So if I target my indestructible land with this, I would still search. Yeah.
So you could use this in that deck, and it would be
you
could go turn 2 Dark Soul Citadel or Cataract, Wildfire my land, get another land next turn, cast this, blow up my non-basic land to go get a ramp myself a land, put you back a land in terms of mana development, make you go to basic. So there's a lot of potential there to do something outside of just use this to beat Lotus Field, but the fact that it does present the first real answer we have for decks like that to Lotus Field as a combo card is pretty great.
Mason, anything you want to say on the card before we move on?
I think the card is very good. I think it is incredibly awkwardly worded in order to make its thing happen, and I wish they had done the wording differently to make this work, because it basically just doesn't work in the rules, but they're it will work. And then it's like that meme with like, now yes. And they just like push the heads together. It's like, you will kill Lotus Field. You will go Llanowar Elf into this and kill the Lotus Field.
I was thinking Jedi mind trick. It's like, these are the droids you're looking for.
Yeah. You don't have hexproof. Yeah. Which is incredible. You just put that line on text. Anyway, card's great. I think it is strong. It is not weak. Will it be strong enough to see play outside of front situations where Lotus Field hate? That is the outcome. But I think it's pretty likely that actually is like something that could happen.
Yeah, it's a it's a big 4/4 flyer for 4.
Yeah, I mean, killing creature lands also isn't weak. Like, in standard, you might just like play this card if there's like a bunch of creature lands that your deck has a problem with.
It's a gadget for your tool belt, Mason, why don't you go next?
So my first card is Forensic Gadgeteer, which is 2 and a blue for a creature of a Dalkin Artificer Detective. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, investigate, and then activate abilities of artifacts you control cost 1 less to activate. This effect cannot reduce the mana that costs less than 1. So if I had 2 of these, it would not cost me 0 to crack a clue. It will always be at least 1. But if you had 2 of these and you had something that took 3 mana to activate, it would only cost 1. They do stack like that. This card is just like Psy Master Thopterus, but instead of making Thopters, it makes clues. So now you can play like 8 Psy in Pioneer. I also think this card's really interesting for just its bottom line of text. Like, if you're a deck that wants to have random pieces of cardboard in play, then this will just generate more cardboard and let you activate your cardboard more. And we talked about Tezzeret from Kamigawa being a like very strong potential planeswalker thanks to its activate ability of artifacts, activated effects costing 2 less. Costing 1 less and then being on like a reasonably statted body that will generate, more things and move through cards. I think this card is really neat. I'm hopeful that it will see play. I'm sure it's going to see play in a bunch of cubes and be a great addition there. And I just really like this card. It was almost a favorite, but it also just does enough that I think is like very possible and enables a new type of deck.
I think they learned from Training Grounds, Abe. I think that they realize that you can't just give us things that we'll abuse.
Yeah, I mean, this card already, whenever you cast an artifact spell, investigate is a very powerful amount of text. Like, my artifact is now 2 artifacts is a lot for artifact synergies, of which there are many. And then also the activated ability costing less means that not only are those clues you're making now just 1 minute draw a card, so it's like I'll just pay a kicker of 1 all my artifact spells and draw a card, which is on artifacts really dangerous. Like, I wonder if this card has vintage applications just because of like that. Like, can I play this in my Paradoxical Outcome deck and then I like have a way to feed that and even more cards or anything like that. I'll have to be drafting it some in Vintage Cube whenever it's there. But yeah, just there's a lot of really strong things going into this card. And the obviously like no free mana off your Prophetic Prisms, etc. clause is a good safety net there.
Next up, I have Leyline of the Guild Pact, which is an enchantment, and it has hybrid mana that is basically green and then 1 of every color. So it's green white, green blue, green red, and green black. And it has the Leyline text. So if this is in your opening hand, you may begin the game with this in play. And then its text box is each non-land permanent you control is all colors. And then lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other type. So there's a lot of weird things about this card. And I want to say this card also almost made my favorites just for the reaction on social media. Because for some people, they were posting how this card does nothing. And other people are posting how it's the craziest card of all time. And I just want to say, like, huge shout out any card that can do that, I think, is really awesome in the game. But what I like about this card is a few things. One, it is a lot of devotion for Nykthos, and I just get to put it in play. And if I'm willing to have a card that is a little dead sometimes, but gives my Nykthos a lot of devotion, then this gives you some really strong starts. You can put this into play any land. It can be your Nykthos even, and play Llanowar Elf on turn 1, and then turn 2 land. You'll have 5 mana by activating your Nykthos. That is a lot of mana. You'll have at least 4. If you're Karn, rest in peace. It would have been something crazy in that format, maybe in older ones. But I think there's a lot of weird things you can do with this. It enables Leyline binding for 1 mana, which is kind of cool. There was a blue-green like devotion deck that I was kind of messing around with, where you would Fey and you had to like filter some amount of your blue devotion with your Nykthos via Kiora with a Fey in play to like get the blue to keep going. This solves all of that while also being a lot of devotion. So there might be something there to explore. I don't know if that's going to actually be good enough, but it's at least interesting. And then in modern, because all your lands are all the land types, things like Cabal Coffers and Valakut get a lot more appealing in a way that is like kind of hard to imagine what a deck looks like with that. We've seen some people put them together, but I think that this just is a card that opens up a whole new bunch of types of decks, which is really cool, and opens up like turn 2 kills in standard as a cool like meme that you're going to see around line, or opens up domain and modern, so your sign of Draco's all the colors, so everything has all the abilities, and it's just a really interesting card, and that's what's my hopeful.
What is the turn 2 storm kill that everybody keeps talking about?
So turn 2, you turn 1, you play Cautious Scamp, or Calphorus Scamp, whatever it's. I don't actually know the name of it. I never heard anyone say it. But the 1/1 that when it dies, you sacrifice it.
I got it in my backpack.
Well, I'm explaining for the listener. The 1/1 that when it dies, you proliferate, and when you hit somebody, you can sack it to deal the damage equal to its power to target anything.
Yeah.
And so you go Gaia's Might. So +5/+5 twice, and that's 11, and then you sack it, and that's 22.
Nice.
Yeah.
There's like what you can play 8 copies of +5/+5 for a single mana in modern.
Yeah, well, this one's in standard, but yes.
Oh, that is in standard.
Yeah, but yeah, you can do it in modern too, and in standard you also have Nishova Brawler, which is now a 2 mana 5/3 with trample that helps enable this. So it's a lot of pieces, but it's like a cool thing you get to do, and not everything has to be the highest tier of competitiveness.
Yeah, so the first thing that I thought about because of this podcast while you're reading it is, do you guys know that those pips can be paid for through Burning Tree Emissary mana? Because one of them is hybrid red, so you can use your red mana. So we got a stew brewing in our new devotion deck by multiple Mason cards here. Shout out. But also I think this card's just cool. I think sometimes we get so focused on how do I want to say this? Not just EV or stuff like that, but the 51. We care so much about the 51 that we ignore the fun, if that makes sense. And I think sometimes the fun is okay, and having those. Part of the thing that we loved about Magic as kids is that we had the opportunity to have fun. We had the opportunity to brew and try to break things, and giving people that opportunity and not being little fun suckers is kind of important. So I really like this pick, Mason.
I am pretty candidly hopeful for this card to allow me to play Mono Green Devotion at the Pro Tour. If I can find a build that does this, it's so powerful to start with 4 Devotion in play that if you have that and Nykthos, suddenly you just have I don't know, what feels like Goblin Charbelcher-esque draws of well, my deck just does so much so fast, it doesn't matter what you do, you're gonna lose to this. And that's the important thing about I have 2 and a Nykthos and 2 lands is okay, anything I draw until these are answered, I'm just going to have the mana to cast.
That's Genesis Wave mana right there. That's not even
yeah. I mean, I'll just storm the festival and flash it back. It doesn't really matter what I hit, but I'm gonna do that this game. It's just a really, really powerful starting spot. So I'm interested to see how that winds up feeling and testing. I haven't had a chance to sit down and do it yet.
Abe, both of your cards almost made my list, so I'm excited. Let's talk about the one that's keeping the door.
So my first card I'm hopeful for, I'm extremely hopeful for. I gotta say, I've got a lot of eggs in this basket, and that is Doorkeeper Thrall. It's 1 and a white for a creature Thrall. 1/2 flash flying with the text: artifacts and creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. So I was I don't know, not too excited by this card initially when I saw it, and then I was talking over the weekend with someone about what I was going to play at the RC, and I was talking about why it was I didn't feel like I could play Hammer, and then it dawned on me that this card, while a bit of a non-bo with Sigarda's Aid and does need some work around that, is an answer to the One Ring trigger and to Solitude with Flash. So previously, I've seen Hammer decks play Hushbringers and the to kind of shut down the Evoke Elementals. But that has a problem of being just a sorcery speed 1/2 that is pretty easy to play around and play through when you know it's there. Doorkeeper Thrall can be a 2-mana creature that counters a Solitude effectively, or like a 2-mana creature that counters a One Ring for all intents and purposes, because it's also going to show off any subsequent Solitude. So if they are like tapping out to cast this card, cast that card, then Doorkeeper Thrall can just neutralize it and makes so that I think a lot of your Urza Saga draws involving drawing also Thrall is going to be like could be able to make those matchups a lot more palatable to the point where Hammer gets even better, to the point where like I'm okay with how bad the Yawgmoth matchup is that's my only one I'm truly down on. And so yeah, I've got a lot of eggs in my heart, a lot of heart eggs in the basket of the Doorkeeper Thrall, because if this card is as good as I think it could be in those matchups, I think that Hammer can be a really, really big player again because of that.
I love that for you. I think it's funny that the Magic community as a whole, like, is like, oh, blue's so rude, it says no by counting your spells. And then white cards do stuff like this. And you're like, who's really saying no to you folks? Is it the blue people keeping people in check? Or is it these white cards that literally make it so entire archetypes don't work? Which one? Which one's the real fun?
Doesn't every color do it though?
This is my
Because
time
red
right now.
kills-
This
kills
is my
and
time
go-
right now, Mason. You
Oh,
can
my
have
bad,
your
my bad,
time
sorry.
later. No, I think this card's really good. I think the flash is like pretty important to this card because it kind of gets to act as that counter spell, so to speak, in those important moments. And I think that really pushes it. Like if you just had to leave it in play to kind of get hurt, you wouldn't get that instant value out of it. And I think that helps a lot. Mason, what about you?
No, I agree. It is like a counterspell, right? Like I think your comparison is apt. Like it doesn't counter the full thing, but as we've learned from Tishani's Tidebinder recently, like just getting rid of that trigger, which is essentially what this does, is really big. And the One Ring, that's really big. I am still skeptical of Hammer's place in the metagame despite those problems. But you got to cook a little. And open deck list, if Abe's got 3 of these in his sideboard on his opponent and he's holding up mana, who knows what's coming down, And so it's cool. It is awkward with my Stoneforge Mystics as well, but maybe I can solve that in sideboard.
I just won't play this. This is a card that's a 2-drop I'm not casting until turn 4, Mason. I've already got the hammer on the creature when I'm casting this.
All right. Well,
there's no law that says I have to have this in play when I do the other thing. I can do 2 different things, Mason. Also, I do really think that, like, truthfully, this card, if it doesn't present too many awkward situations the way it actually plays out, I do think that this meaningfully improves the Amulet Titan and the One Ring matchups. And just like those 2 alone is already like enough for me to consider this card. So I feel like that's a big portion of it. And then like you can devote more to trying to beat like Yawgmoth or whatever, or just accept your loss to Yawgmoth while you're doing that. I'm surprised you think that the metagame positioning isn't that great with that. I think like against Rhinos, Scam, and Murktide, you're already in a decent spot. I think Rhinos is the toughest of those, but is like still pretty 50-50 and maybe even better the more you build towards it. But then like those other 2 matchups, making one of those better and your worst matchup in the fringe of the metagame better, I think makes it like Hammer could advance to being in that second tier.
I believe that this card does meaningfully help the Amulet matchup. I have no doubts about that. I have bigger doubts about Hammer as a whole, but maybe like this card is just enough to cover the spots where you were losing that you can like sneak enough of those matchups in a tournament and then win your good matchups that you can succeed. But I mean, I like playing Hammer a lot. I would like to be able to play Hammer. So
before I move on,
well, so I can commentate your matches and be like, "That's my friend Abe. He's got a big bad thrall, and you do it."
You got to think it's good in the mirror.
Abe, you know what? Honestly, hang on. And then we can move on. If this gets Abe to stop putting Teferi Time Raveler in his sideboard of Hammer, Doorkeeper Thrall is my new bestie. We're in there. If
Are
I
you
have to
kidding me?
get
That card's so messed up. It's so
oh
good.
no,
That's an
Victor, what is it?
that's an entire different episode. We can stash that skeleton for later.
Oh man, you stole my joke. Go ahead, Abe.
Yeah, so my my other card I'm hoping for is Case of the Stash Skeleton. This is another case enchantment. So it's 1 in a black, and when it enters battlefield, you create a 2/1 black skeleton creature token and suspect it. So it's a 2/1 black skeleton that has menace and can't block. And then to solve the case, you need to, at the end of your turn, control no suspected skeletons. And then once it's solved, it has 1 in a black, sacrifice this case, search your library for a card, put it in your hand, and then shuffle, activate only its sorcery. This card is just sweet. Like, this card is a 2-mana, 2/1 menace that can't block, which is not the best. But it's one that, like, if your opponent double blocks it, like they just never want to block it because they double block it, then you get to tutor for the best card in any given spot, like the next turn. Or if you use one of the many cards with Bargain from Eldraine, or have any amount of sack outlets used for an extra token lying around, like, this is not just a 2/1 that's going to deal, like, attack once or twice. This is now enabling, like, this is material you're meaningfully using, and then Demonic Tutor later. Like, it's 2/1 that can't block and has menace, that is just a resource on its own, plus Demonic Tutor three turns from now. It's Profane Tutor plus a 2/1. I think this card's, like, really sweet, and I hope it's as sweet as I think it is, because I think it's just, like, pretty lights out.
So I did say that both your cards almost made my list, and I wanted to say why this card didn't make my list. And it's gonna sound really crazy, and it's fine. Y'all can make fun of me. But, like, we had Diabolic Intent. It was either mine or Abe's card, I think, when it was spoiled in Brothers War. And I just am starting to question whether we've gotten past the point of Demonic Tutor being the nutso busto card that it has been historically, because we're so good at other things in Magic that the 2 mana is, like, kind of a lot. Like, obviously in certain formats where, like, you're just looking for your combo piece or whatever, and it's another spell to your storm counter, stuff like that, obviously that's not true. But I'm starting to question whether 2 mana is, like, too much to pay for these style of effects. I don't know why I'm like, I think the Diabolic Intent is, but, like, literally in my head I was like, neither Abe or I just talked about Diabolic Intent. That card has seen 0 play. And there's creatures lying around all the time right now. You'd think that would be fine. I don't know. That's kind of, like, why I didn't include it on my list.
I just don't think tutors. I think part of the reason tutors were strong is your cards sucked back in the day, and you needed to get your good ones, or, like, cards were so polarizing, you needed to find your good one. And I mean, they're not, like, weak or whatever, but, like, Demonic Tutor is not, like, a very high pick card for me in, like, a cube draft. You know what I mean? Like, 2 mana is just a lot because so many cards generate something to do. Now, I will say that, like, if I want to play a deck that has, like, a specific combo, and maybe it's something like a creativity or a transmogrify type thing in standard, this being something that puts something in play, counts as a creature, and then maybe helps find that after I do it the first time or find something else, that is very appealing to me. I don't like it in a lot of applications where it's not fair. I think that, like, Diabolic Intent is just, like, a very weak card. I think Demonic Tutor, like, is a card you could put into standard, but, like,
that's
just
actually my point, though, right? Like, if they
Yeah.
they literally said Diabolic Tutor is in standard right now, like, I think I would struggle to find a deck, like, multiple decks that I would put it in. And I know that,
I
like,
would.
I know that I sound crazy right now. I just think that like I think of, like, if they printed, like, Green Sun Zenith, how many decks would it go into?
Oh, Green Sun Dance, I think, is different, but, like, dramatically. But I think that Demonic Tutor, I believe you're right that, like, it would require very specific things for me to want to play more than one of them. I think a lot of my decks would end up playing one tutor that are decks that go long, that have redundancy in effects. But Kicker 2 to search my deck for a card at sorcery speed is, like, strong, and, like, it is very much game designer, not weak. Real world, I'm not as interested. And its applications in the older formats, I think, is where Demonic Tutor would shine, not in standard.
That's why I think getting a body, right? You get like a resource up front on this, and like it's rectangle theory plus a built-in mechanism to cash out. And cashing out at Demonic Tutor, something where like you already got other tangible advantage out of playing the card, and then at the stage where like, okay, the game is developed enough, and I already did stuff, and like maybe I know what exactly the war position is. I can go get my one wrath or like my removal spell I need to answer the shoulder they have, or like the Archfiend of Dross they have, or whatever it is. Or like maybe I just want to hold on to the fact that at some point they're going to present the right kind of problem for me to need to go find the right kind of answer, and I can just sit with this thing in play once my skeletons died, and I have that answer rolled up. Like having Demonic Tutor in your hand at the right time, and it always being something that like you were still playing the game otherwise, and then you're like, okay, well I drew the right card, I just need to pay 2 more mana for it. I think is pretty interesting. Like this is a body plus. Without the body, I think it's pretty unplayable.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I just was like backing Spencer up or whatever on Demonic Tutor. I think is like a little bit there, and once again, I do think that like this card is appreciably different because, like you mentioned, it is a 2-mana 2/1 menace and rectangle theory, and I think like notably, and I keep mentioning this because I think it's like there's like a whole. They always do a card like this in standard, like a polymorph or a transmogrifier and novel creativity, where it's like go until you hit a creature, and having cards like this enable that. And now with standard being 3 years, I need to like mentally mark cards like this where it's like, okay, if they give me like a blue one, I might be able to build like blue black control that flips into a Traxa, or whatever. And that's really, really strong. So I think this card is game designer, not weak. And in practice, you're gonna have to work for it a little bit, but it is very cool. And like you need to give it some respect because it is doing something very unique.
You could convince me that like a standard polymorph deck would want this card. I think that is totally fair. I also just want to say that like this card did almost make my list, so I'm not like I don't think this card is bad. I'm starting to question how I look at Magic cards more now, as like the game changes. I'm curious if is there a way other than just like attacking or sacrificing this thing and it getting blocked to get rid of the skeleton? Like that.
I mean, it's like the bargain stuff. I think you can play like if you're a red black like Torch the Tower or whatever, you could bargain because it's a token. Is a big part of the draw to me.
Sacrificing it would be the main way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, or like I don't know if there's any creatures that like pick up things or flicker things as like a drawback or like an additional cost, but no, it's mostly that, just combat and just attacking and it getting blocked. But even I think just having like a 2/1 menace can't block is like pretty good at pressuring planeswalkers or life totals in the right spots. Like that thing with Gix is just like a good curve for like 3 and
that's totally fair. Let's go on to hits. These are cards that we just think are for sure going to see play in one format or another, and I'm going to let you go first this time.
Yeah, so my first hit is Lightning Helix. I feel like there's not too much to say about this card. It's a very simple, classic design. It's red and a white to deal 3 damage to any target and gain 3 life. It is like probably my favorite simple Magic design of all time. It's like all the way back from OG Ravnica. I mean, this card is played in like Modern Burn. It was played in like it was almost like half the red splash and blue control to make it Jeskai and in Modern in days gone by. I think this card has a ton of applications in Pioneer, in decks that are like defensive, or even in decks that are like racing decks. I think it has applications in Standard for the same reasons. It's just Lightning Strike with an upside on it if you're just going to have the mana. And yeah, this is just like one of my favorite cards played of all time. And because it's very good and efficient at what it does, so I'd be very surprised if it was not a card that saw a ton of play pretty immediately on release.
Yeah, we don't have. I just want to mention that we don't have. I don't remember what is the name of the red-white fast land.
Inspiring Vantage.
Yeah, we don't have Inspiring Vantage in Standard, and I just want to call that out. Like, like the most easy slot for this card does not exist. There is actually some mana problems in the color combo for the aggressive versions of the deck. However, we do have the stuff for other Naya aggressive decks, which I have been thinking a lot about. I know that I personally top aided an RCQ with like Naya Wolves like a standard format ago, and there have been even more and more really good Naya, support things, and this would just kind of add to that list. Actually, this would go really well in Naya Wolves too. Now that I think about it.
Yeah, and there's already there's Naya Triumph too.
I think most Naya decks are going to get improved by adding Helix to it.
That's true. That's fair. I just meant because it was an instant, right? So
I think my Naya Insect deck with Bushwhack's could be pretty good. No, I think this card's strong. I think I think it's most interesting to talk about this card in the context of Standard and Pioneer, and specifically Standard, where Mono Red has been quite good. It is very efficient. I've played some of Abe's deck we talked about last week. I think it is very good. I think Mono Red is a deck that needs to be respected more. And the question is now, because Shock's in this set too. So now we have Shock, Play with Fire, Lightning Helix, excuse me. That is like a meaningful amount of burn. And does that change what red is? And yes, we don't have Inspiring Vantage, but we do have like the Battlefield Forge. So there's like something going on there. That's a lot of burn, and like maybe that's something. And then in Pioneer, I think it's really interesting because there we do have all of it. And now we have Forest Charm and Helix. And Pioneer Burn has been a deck that can't exist for a long time for a lot of reasons. But maybe there's finally, this is enough to move the needle.
Yeah, I think it's like kind of a double-edged sword of whether or not it's going to be a card that moves the needle more aggressive in a format or away from that. Like, I could see a world where, like, blue-white in Pioneer splashes this very good, like, 2-mana interactive board spell that kills, Fable the Mirror Breaker and tokens and various X3s. Like, can kill Amalia, but you pay the ward and you get it back. Or otherwise, I just think it's a card that is so good that it plays in all places. My other hit is Long Goodbye, which is a 1 and a black instant that cannot be countered. That is destroy target creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. So this is just a can't be countered eliminate. It's like a strict upgrade to a card that sees on and off play in Pioneer. I think in Standard as well, this will be a card that is very good. I think the can't be countered clause, like especially in Pioneer, makes things like back when Rakdos was just the best deck in Pioneer, or like the most played deck, and people played all the time, like Graveyard Trespasser, Ward discard a card was a huge pain, and made that card as good as it was in spite of it looking kind of pedestrian. This card breezes right past that. Ward be damned. It will just push through. And I think that there's something to be said for like a lot of those small, like, kind of hidden like upsides on cards, or like small things that provide that tension that make them a little bit better, kind of being neutralized by this not being able to be countered, being better in more spots that make it pretty appealing. I can even see this being played in Modern in some format, like shapes of the format where like Teferi is really good, or there's like another small planeswalker that is worth playing. And so I would be surprised this one didn't see more played in like what is like Anoint with Afflictions you play right now, which does effectively the same thing.
I played Anoint with Affliction yesterday. Like literally cast the card yesterday.
Yeah, and you had no way to give your opponent poison counters, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And the exile doesn't really matter to you, right?
No.
So yeah. Yeah, I think this just has all that application with more upside, can't be countered. And yeah, another way to answer Rafine without having to pay ward, throwing that out there, it slices and dices. So I think this is another really good one.
Given it's a murder mystery set, I have 2 questions to ask about this card. And first, Spencer, would you say you're a mono red enthusiast now in Standard? Or at least an enjoyer?
I would not say enthusiast. I had some fun, yeah.
Okay, and curious that Abe Stein also said the exile doesn't matter, yet he plays Squee in his deck. Curious! No, I'm just kidding.
Squee, which I
played
poured
no
out against all of the black.
I was going to say, I don't know that I activated a Squee this weekend.
Oh, I love Squee in against the black deck.
Oh no, against the decks you don't want in your deck.
Oh, interesting. I thought it was right. We can talk about this off thing, but interesting. I also play North Affliction. I think it is strong. I think this card is strong.
Yeah.
It is very good, and it is also funny to me that it is very good against Teferi Time Raveler, because sometimes the play pattern is like you stick your Teferi Time Raveler and you untap, and then it like never dies again in the older formats, and this gets around that, and also it never really comes up, but theoretically someone could chalice on 2 in other spots, to really lock things up, and this is like chapow.
That's funny.
And yeah, I've thought a lot about like if you wanted to answer Teferi and you were a Cascade deck that had a Cascader for 2, would you use this card? Which is a thing that exists in Modern. And I think the answer is yes. And so I think this card is good. I think it has a lot of applications. So
yeah, I mean, some of those situations are really kind of like a pick your poison application. If we're being honest, you really have to, find you gotta take it on the chin a couple times before you realize you want a card like this. For those watching, he's not groaning in agony of my joke as much as he is in pain because he has a headache. I'm sorry, Mason.
No, that one was the joke.
Oh, all right. My first card of hits is Pick Your Poison. This is a sorcery. You choose one. Each opponent sacrifices an artifact. Each opponent sacrifices an enchantment. Each opponent sacrifices a creature flying. This is just 1 mana, do a thing that I didn't we have a standard playable of this that was also a sorcery that was just the flying one, like not even 4 years ago? Yeah. Like, what is happening? I think this card's like really good. I think this could see play. I mean, when you get to like the 1 mana cost and like these type of like really flexible sideboard cards, like this legitimately could see play all the way through Magic. I don't think that there's a format that this couldn't touch, to be completely honest. It's super flexible. It costs 1 green. There's not like a lot to be said about it, right? Like it's just a really efficient thing at what it does. It dodges lots of different things because it's a sacrifice effect. It's really good.
Yeah, I mean the versatility on this card makes it what it is, especially because there's a lot of times. I mean, even not to bring it back to Mono Red again, but Mono Red has 1 artifact to place, Herb Forge. It's a very important card, and that's just where it's important. There's a 1 mana answer to that because they're never have another thing to get rid of. And the same thing can be said for certain next enchantments or with flying creatures. And when that's the case, this is a card that's going to catch all of those. And even when it's just a matter of, okay, maybe I just need to tag something because a lot of their things are artifacts, or a lot of things are enchantments, or a lot of things are flyers. This is just an efficient edict for those things too. Yeah, super, super potent card. Really good at just hating out the right stuff.
Mason, anything you want to say on this one before I move on?
I think it's really good. I think it's modern playable.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's like I feel like so often we disrespect flexibility in modern, and like Force of Vigor is very strong, for example, but like this answers different things while overlapping a little bit with that. So like maybe your Force of Vigor deck is weak to Murktide, and so now in that matchup you have like an answer to their Blood Moon that's maybe really good against you, and the Murktide, and other matchups, it's just like a 1 mana sack something, which is just good. Trade up on mana.
My next card is one that I think everybody knows can be mine. It's green, green, green for an instant Archdruid's Charm. Choose one, search your library for a creature or land card. Reveal it, put the card into your battlefield, tap its land, otherwise put it into your hand. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control, or exile an artifact or enchantment. I saw people say that this card does nothing on Twitter. I also saw people say this is the best card in the set on Twitter. And I think this card is just really good. Like, the ability to search for any land and put it into play is really powerful. I mean, there are many decks in many formats that would want a card like this. I saw people talking about an Amulet Titan. I think the mana cost is a little restrictive, but definitely possible. I think that in standard, like there's lots of standard decks that would like happily play this card, and then also it exiles the One Ring. So there's lots to love about this card. I assume it will see about as much play in formats as Archmage's Charm did, for what it's worth, which is like sometimes a 2 of in some decks, but a really powerful tool in your tool belt.
Yeah, I think this card lands definitely between the best card in the set and does nothing. But I do think that, like, it's not a card that is, like, people I think disrespect a lot triple green as a casting cost. That is a real deck building restriction. And also for all of these effects, triple green is a real cost to gain access to them. With the exception of maybe Exile Target Artifact or Enchantment, where you're getting access to like most things you're going to want to exile and make sure you take care of, that's a good rate to pay for that because it's a niche effect and it's stapled to two really strong alternative effects. Otherwise, you are paying a premium for the selection you're getting or for access to the effect, right? Like the punch effect at 3 green at instant speed is a high cost and not like you're paying a real cost to get that. You're paying for the flexibility when you do that. There are better options like in the same class of spell, and same thing for like in most formats searching for like a creature or a land. But getting access to all of them together and having a deck that uses all of them well, if there is one, is going to really love this card, and this card is going to make that deck possible. Like being that flexible and that modal, enabling those different game plans or those different draws, I think is what really makes this card. But it's hard for a card like that is so restrictive to be on that level of power, in my opinion.
Yeah, it definitely asks a lot of hoops of you. I will say really quickly that I love that Archmage's Charm has existed. Then we have Archdruid's Charm, which means the cycle has begun. So Archbishop's Charm is coming. But like, I think it's very cool to have modal cards like this that cover a lot of space with very like prohibitive mana costs. Like color is just really hard, and this is maybe the color that does it the best. Like green is the best at maybe black as well. So green and black are the charms I'm most interested to see how they're designed and balanced because these are the ones we can do it the easiest and quickly. So I'm interested to see exactly how much play this card does see because its modes are powerful, and especially the first mode to search for a creature or a land. Those are like very good when they are what your deck is built around and can afford to work without this card as well. So it kind of like adds a bunch of redundancy to a deck that maybe wants something and then doubles as removal or disenchant when you already have the thing. And I think that is a very powerful card. So I'm curious to see kind of how this ends up breaking down. Very strong Leyline of the Guild Pack, Dave. That's all I'm saying, because Leyline makes all your things green.
I can go find my one fave wishes.
I did have to correct somebody on Twitter who thought this did 2 things. I was like, no, it's a charm. All the charms do one thing. The commands do 2 things. You can charm something, and then you can command something. They're different. They cost different amounts of charisma to do. So
I'm gonna take a Sharpie to this and make it Archdruid's command, and then just choose 2 modes of the Pro Tour, and that's how it'll win.
Your card would be so much better than everybody else.
Yeah, I don't know why people didn't do that.
Yeah.
Mason, both of your cards also almost made my list. Why don't you talk about the first one?
Yeah, so first up, I have No More Lies. This is white and a blue for an instant. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it in its owner's graveyard. So it is mana leak with the exile clause for white and blue mana instead of 1 and a blue. Mana leak is a very strong card that we've had for a long time. A little like behind the scenes, when I saw this card work on MH3, I thought about Spencer, who's always like, just give us mana leak in standard. It's just the thing you would say on the podcast a lot. I thought, well, in like a year and a half, buddy, your wish will come true. Now it kept moving on, reading through the file. But I think this card is really good in blue, white, and Pioneer. I think that deck has been playing cards like Make Disappear, and while the mana cost is not nothing, it is still a very powerful effect. And I'm very curious to see how this plays out in Standard. We do have Cavern of Souls now, it kind of, preemptively, right? Like this time they released Cavern first, then they released the Mana Leak, which I think is a pretty smart way to do it. But I'm interested to see sort of how this card plays out. And I just want to quickly say, I doubt this is a Modern player. I keep getting sit deck lists where like they have this card in their deck, and like yeah, it pitches to Solitude, but like you were not wanting a Mana Leak, and if you were, it was because your deck was a deck splashing blue, not a blue deck. So
Then they gave us Counterspell in Modern.
yeah, but people were wanting like more counter spells.
More than that.
Yeah.
No, Arch.
Once you pop, you just can't stop.
Fair enough. So it was really funny because when I fully planned on having this be one of my hits, and then Mason got to it first, yesterday, which means behind the scenes, Abe and I really lagged behind on getting our pick twos in. So I think that this card will see Standard play. I have no doubt about it. People have already asked me like, oh, like what do you think this is the blue-white mid-range decks? And I was like, I think this is a reason to play blue-white mid-range over the other, like the blue-white flash, blue-white mid-range, blue-white soldiers. Like I think this is a legitimate like boon to those decks. I also think that blue-white control is not that far off in Standard. I think Abe might have mentioned that earlier in the podcast as a potential thing that you could be doing. This definitely helps a deck like that out that really suffers. And then can we be, I know you've already mentioned it, but can we be honest how bad, like, we have hammered home that playing cancel in your Pioneer deck is like literally suicide. And this is not that. This is actually a really good card. I think the mana base has to change a lot. They played, if I'm not mistaken, they played a lot of Field of Ruin style of effects historically in Blue, White, and Pioneer, and I think that would actually be a hard thing for this card to fit into. I guess that being said, they played Dovin's Veto, so maybe I'm just up in the night, so maybe it just doesn't matter. But I think this card's great. I think that it dramatically changes my opinion of the Blue-White deck in Pioneer, and I don't envy you for the Pro Tour. Having to figure out if it's important.
Yeah, I think this card is definitely important. It very easily slots into like blue-white in various forms, which is one of the best decks in Pioneer right now. I think a question of like, does that change anything about the format as a whole that exists is not there, but I would be thoroughly surprised this was not just a huge player in like it's one of those cards that comes out and kind of like when like Fatal Push came out and it was like, yeah, I mean we're just playing it now and it's good and that's what it is, and the best decks that use it are gonna do well. So like, yeah, if you're playing a blue-white deck, your deck just got better because instead of playing like some of our Make Disappears, now you have these Mana Leaks that also happen to exile the spell, and who knows when that comes up. So yeah, I think it's a very, very strong addition to Pioneer and to Standard, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Last but not least is War Leader's Call, which is a card I'm very excited about. This is one red-white enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, War Leader Carl deals 1 damage to each opponent. So, Glorious Anthem, Impact Tremors, they kiss. Now we have War Leader's Call. I think this card's really cool. I think, like in Standard, there's already a red-white Convoke deck that goes pretty wide, and I think the Convoke creatures, like, I've talked to some people that have played the deck, and they actually didn't super love them in the deck, and other people did. So I don't know. There's some amount of like maybe you don't even want 9 Errant of Eos in your deck in high numbers, and I think this card kind of slots in there. And Immodane's Recruiter is weird in the deck where it is good, but like you often don't abuse the haste part of the card very well. So this card just being a Glorious Anthem and an Impact Tremors is really strong. Similar things can apply to Pioneer, I think, to a lesser extent, but could come up. And ultimately, I think War Leader's Call is a card that's going to make the red-white Convoke deck in Standard very good, with its biggest flaw being something we talked about earlier. It doesn't have the red-white fast land to help really smooth its draw. But I think it has a lot of good stuff. There's also the new Thraben Inspector in this set. So really, the Pioneer red-white deck is just in Standard. There's like very few cards missing, and most of it is like sideboard stuff. But I don't know. This card is very weird, and I've seen a lot of different opinions on this card, but I think it is pretty good. And I'm curious to see what y'all have to say.
So the first thing that I thought of when I saw this card, I actually said on the Discord, is I was really excited to brew a Killer Among Us deck with this card. But that is when I believed a Killer Among Us cost 2 mana. Where I was like, man, this is going to be great. That being said, I still think that this card doesn't just fit into, like, red, white. I think this actually fits really well into, like, Naya decks as well, and could be used in those style of decks to, stay bigger than your opponent, things like that, and really close out damage. I think this card's really powerful. It was one of the cards that, when it was previewed, I thought was super powerful, and really, really pushing the envelope. So I think it's a great hit.
Yeah, this is a real chocolate and peanut butter card. This almost made my list too. Is one of my favorites. It just does what you want it to do. If you're a deck full of creatures, now your creatures are better. If you have no creatures in play and you draw creatures and you can't use them yet, well, now you can. They're dealing some damage. And I think that in a lot of ways, like, the 1 point of damage for every creature adds up, especially when it's turning into 2 points of damage for every creature, or you're making tokens and then it's now it's, so I made 3/1/1s, and if I'm hitting you with all of them and I got those triggers, now it's 2 damage for each of those creatures that I'm getting. Like curving like a couple of like some small stuff into like wedding announcement into this card, or this card into wedding announcement. That's just a lot of material that's very big and dealing damage, and like in a way that these decks tend to, especially against other decks full of creatures or with larger creatures like mid-range decks, creating a wide board that while you're doing it and while you're engaging this arms race of like, well, your opponent's like, they can't attack because you have enough things to go around, they're big stuff, they leave back to block. Now it's like you're losing that fight over time with this card in play, in a way that just Glorious Anthem or just Impact Tremors doesn't do so great alone. But getting both of these together on one card for only 1 more mana than the Impact Tremors, or for 1 additional colored mana, like color of mana, to a Glorious Anthem, I think does take this card just a step above. And I'm really excited to see what its potential is.
Yeah, I think that people might underappreciate the squeeze that this puts you in. And I think that I can't remember if it was on if it was on the show where we talked about like that kind of that pincering that you're able to do with certain cards. But it kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah, I mean, a small anecdote from playing the Boris Convoke deck and Pioneer at the RC. So I played against Doomwake playing Gruul, and he played a turn 2 Rampaging Ferocidon, and then I ended the game at 3 life. And the Rampaging Ferocidon never attacked me successfully. I just put creatures into play for the rest of the game until I eventually drew an Intimidating Recruiter, or like crewed up a Warden that pushed through everything and won the game. That like I stopped playing creatures on purpose because I didn't want to die to like double stomp or something. I could have easily done 20 damage with an Impact Tremors in that game, right? And I wouldn't have put that card in my deck, but this is something I could feasibly put in my deck, especially because it's something that dodges something like Temporary Lockdown, gives me insulation against sweepers, like leverages all the token makers I have, and in Standard, where we don't have Venerated Loxodon, this is like kind of the next best thing. I think this card is really the real deal.
That is going to do it for the Pick 2 set review. One of the best ways to support the show is by Patreon. We don't do Patreon questions on the Pick 2 set review, but you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg to support the show. It helps out a ton. You can also join the conversation on YouTube with comments and questions. Really helps the show out. We really appreciate the work that you, the listener, have been putting into it the last couple weeks. It is actively noticeable in the algorithm. So I just want to say thank you. 20 likes on the last podcast. You doubled our views. Like, legitimately, I'm not joking. If you want to join the conversation, the Patreon Discord is popping. The public Discord is also going strong right now. Links to that in the show notes. The YouTube comments we've already mentioned. And then you can follow us on Twitter at CCMTG. But the best way to support the show right now, like, subscribe, and comment, and a puppy will catch its tail for the first time if you do all 3 this week. And think about how happy you'll make that puppy. Where can people find you, Abe?
People can find me over at twitter.com/morenothings. Same stuff as always. Coaching is on hiatus through the PT and probably a week or 2 after, just so I can recover from all the preparation I'm doing for the upcoming events next month. But I'll still be posting things from time to time. See my takes on Ravnica Remastered Limited, where I'm a champion at my local RSQ done for the season with that, and just whatever else I come across, especially in the coming weeks. And probably I'll do some debriefing on whatever goes on with the RC and with the PT in a little bit more depth than just what we'll do on the show. So,
do you think you'll ever get to the point where you're not listening to enough music and people can start suggesting songs?
I don't think I'm going to be there quite yet. For context, I'm doing a song a day this year, and it's going to help me have like monthly playlists and stuff. My liked songs, I have more than 10 years worth of liked songs on Spotify that I could do this for. And I do have a lot of ways I'm naturally like churning my own music library.
Cool.
But if there are things you want to listen to, I'm open to suggestions. If you ever want to give me a music rec on Twitter, I will probably listen to it at some point. It just might not be for like a month.
I love it. Mason?
You can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. If you want to reach out for coaching, you can do that on Twitter, in my DMs there, or via email at masoneClark@gmail.com. You can find me over at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. And also pay attention to my Twitter. I get to announce a cool thing later this week, which is awesome, that might interest some of y'all. So keep an eye out for that. Spencer, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me at He's a Game. You can find me this week. We're switching it up. We were going to do standard this week, but my family was sick for Constructed Clash, so we didn't get to record. But luckily, that's fine. Standard is going to be like a dead format for like a week anyway. So we're going to be recording Modern this week, so we'll check that out on the YouTube channel. And then, yeah, every week or so, we've been missing some time because of illness and stuff, but Need to Nerd Podcast is the other place. Yeah, that's kind of where people can find me right now. Hey, what did you learn this week on the podcast?
I learned that Mason hates when I put Teferi 3 into my hammer decks, even though that card is very good. I'm learning it. I'm internalizing it. I'm hating everything about it. I'm hurt by it, but I learned it.
Anything you want to say to Abe right now, Mason? Or are you good?
The person at the recovery is talking about it.
Right. Mason, what did you learn on the show this week?
I learned that Abe didn't pick up on me not liking Teferi Time Raveler about never mentioning it in the conversations back to him. And he would be like, yeah. So we got Teferi in the deck, and I was like, and then he'd be like, Springleaf Drum. I was like, I like Springleaf Drum. I thought that would cue in on the Teferi part where it was like I never really talked about him. Like I thought, this might be a divide.
I thought it was a given. I was like, yep.
I think it's a poor communication style, Mason. I feel like you might need to work on your
I thought it was a given.
There's a really good book called Radical Candor, and it talks about how to communicate with each other through love and like being honest with each other without being a jerk. It's a really, really good book. If you haven't read it, you can also watch a 6-minute YouTube video that explains it. Abe, have you read this book?
It is a foundation of the management program that I'm in. I have not read the book, but I've read like pretty sizable excerpts from it, and it's like a foundational piece of how they educate at my company.
It legitimately changed my life and like who I am as a person. After Kim Scott is the author. She went and did a keynote at a conference that I was at, and it was the best keynote I've ever heard in my life. She also gave me a free copy of the book, and I was like, I read it. I probably read it like 4 times. It's really good.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's funny because when you're trying to think about what the book's name was, I was like, oh, Radical Candor. Yeah. Like, well, I just recommend. Like, oh, well, he recommends that book all the time, so it can't be that one.
Yeah, I do recommend the book all the time. I love it. It's so good. You gotta plug. Maybe we can have sponsorship. No, I love it. It's really great. maybe be a little more candid with Abe next time, please.
No.
No. Shock shooketh me. That's what I learned this week. I knew in my head that Shock wasn't in standard, and I saw Shock on the previews, but never put it together that Shock wasn't in, like, does that make sense? Is that weird?
It's weird, but I get you.
Because like, I have a
was
Shock
actually
effect.
talking to my friend about Mono Red, and I was like, I feel like there's a world in which we could play like one of the cyber slots could become like a 5th Shock in terms of it being just Shock to play with fire. And then I was looking on Arena, and I was like, Shock's not legal. What? So no, it's not just you.
I knew it wasn't legal because they gave us that instead. And it makes sense that it's in the set for limited, right? Because you need a 1 mana kill a 2/2 so that you could, you can pay for the stuff. But also, is that a fix for Monastery Swiftspear? Like, do I want more Shocks? Is that a thing I want in my life? I don't know.
Bloodthirsty Adversary, Swiftspear, there's some other stuff.
Do I want more Shocks? That's like such a... I don't know that I've ever
don't
really
think-
wanted 4 Shocks, but like, am I now in a world where I want more? So, that's deck building. Thank you everybody so much for listening. We'll see everybody next time on a brand new episode of Constructed Criticism.